So we're going to talk mostly about the FAFSA tonight, and that's the primary form that you have to complete to be considered for any federal aid, state aid, and a lot of schools use the FAFSA to determine your eligibility. Most people do the FAFSA online, and there's the address that you would go to complete your FAFSA, studentaid.gov/FAFSA. If for some reason you prefer doing a paper FAFSA, you can print out a PDF, which is also available at that website, but most people don't do that. The FAFSA is available online in both English and Spanish. And there's, I think, 9 other languages that if you have an issue and you need translation, you can call the Federal Student Aid information number, and they will help you translate that FAFSA form. So I'm getting something from Spring. I think somebody's texting me questions. Okay. So for the 24-25 FAFSA, we're using the 2022 tax information. So that's what will be pulled over when you complete your FAFSA. So this federal form, as I said, is used to determine your eligibility for federal programs, state programs, which I work for FIA, and we administer the Pennsylvania state program, and then the programs that the schools administer, any of their need-based programs. After you file the FAFSA, after it's complete, the schools that you list on the FAFSA will receive the results, the information that you input it into the FAFSA online, and also FIA will receive that information, and the schools will use that information to determine your eligibility for financial aid, and we at FIA will do the same thing. Something that's a little different this year, I'm sure a lot of you know that this year is kind of an unusual year because normally the FAFSA comes out in October. This year it wasn't out until the end of December. The FAFSA is able to be completed now, but none of the schools or FIA are going to get the results of that information until late January. Once the schools have your information, they'll send out what they call financial aid notifications or financial aid offers to the students, telling them what they'll be eligible for. So as I said, this is just an unusual year where the FAFSA was delayed until December 31st. Next year, for when you're applying for 25-26, because you have to complete this FAFSA every year, the FAFSA will be available October 1st. So since the FAFSA is available now, but schools won't be receiving the information until late January, you have plenty of time to complete it. Even if you complete it on January 1st, the schools aren't going to get the information, so there's not really a rush. You do, however, want to keep track of the schools that your student is applying to. What deadlines do they impose that you have the FAFSA completed by? Because you want to make sure you meet those deadlines. The students will receive an email once that the information has been sent to the schools. If the student did a FAFSA, because I've been helping a lot of students do FAFSAs, a lot of families, and some of them are in review because something didn't get completed right. Well, at this point, until the FAFSA is sent to the schools, you can't go back and make a correction. So once the information at the end of January is sent to the schools, you will be able to go back in and do any corrections or maybe provide a signature that's missing. Once all that's done, the student receives what's called a FAFSA submission summary. So they can review everything that, they listed on the FAFSA and what their student aid index is, which is the result of the FAFSA. The other thing I wanted to mention is when the student's listing their schools on the FAFSA that they want the information sent to, the student doesn't have to have been accepted at the schools in order to list those schools. So any school that they're considering, they can list on the FAFSA. Now, as for Pennsylvania state grant, for most students, May 1st, 2024 is the deadline for Pennsylvania state grant. Some students, and it's only first-time students, have an August 1st deadline. So that's if they're a first-time applicant, never applied for the Pennsylvania state grant before, and they plan to enroll in one of those types of institutions you see listed there. So it could be a community college, business, trade, and technical school, a hospital school of nursing, or a 2-year program that is not transferable to another institution. So, if there is somebody like that, and sometimes students are thinking, I don't want to go to college, I'm really not interested. And then after the May 1st deadline date, they say, hey, maybe I want to go to the community college. So they have that August 1st deadline. But the next year that they apply, they're back to the May 1st deadline. So in order to get prepared to sit down and do the FAFSA, some of the information that you'll need, everybody needs social security numbers, students and parents. Sometimes parents don't have a social number and they'll be instructed as to what to do about that. Everybody needs an email address, and the student should not use a high school email address because they're not going to have access to that after they graduate. As I said, 24-25 FAFSA will be using the 2022 federal tax return information. Some parents will be asked to list their assets. All students will have to list their assets, but some parents will be asked to list their assets, not all parents, because there's skip logic built into the FAFSA, which determines whether or not parents are required to list their assets. If they are, you will need things like, what do you have as of the date you complete the FAFSA? What do you have in cash, checking, savings? Do you have any other kind of investment accounts? Do you have a 529, stocks, all kinds of things like that. If you're receiving child support, you need to know the total amount you received for the most recently completed calendar year. The student and any parent contributors have to apply for an FSA ID, and you should do that at least 4 days prior to completing the FAFSA. So, and again, they talk about any current record of stocks you have, bonds, investments, 529s. So who fills out the FAFSA? A new word that, we're seeing this year is called a contributor. So a student is a contributor to the FAFSA. If that student's married, the student's spouse will be a contributor. If the student's dependent on their parents and the biological parents or adoptive parents could be a contributor. And if the parents are divorced and say the student's listing information for mom and mom has remarried, the step parent could be a contributor. Now, in order to determine if the student is considered dependent on their parents, under the student personal circumstances of the FAFSA, they're asked a bunch of questions to see if they are independent. So they have to answer yes to one of these questions you see here in order to be considered independent. So they have to be 24 years old. They have to be were married, working on a master's or doctorate, served in the Army, all those kinds of things. So most high school seniors are answering no to these questions. But there are some questions asked there that they might be able to answer yes to. For example, since age 13, both parents were deceased. Somebody might be able to say yes to that. They would be considered independent. So this is the section that determines whether or not parent information is going to be needed on the form. So if the student is considered dependent and the parents are married, living together, both parents' information is going to be completed on the FAFSA. If the biological parents are not married and living together, both of their information goes on the FAFSA. If the parents are divorced or separated, the information for the parent that provided the most financial support to the student over the last 12 months is the parent that would provide information. If the parents say they provided the same amount of support, they're to use the parent with the higher income and assets. And if that parent has remarried, it would be step parents' information as well. Again, if they're adopted, adoptive parent information will go on the form. If the student has foster parents, their information does not get listed on the form. If they're in legal guardianship, and that has to have been determined by the courts, they are considered independent, so they wouldn't have any parent information on the form. If they live with grandparents or aunts, none of their information goes on the form. Everybody that is a contributor has to provide consent, and you're consenting to allow the IRS to pull your 2022 tax information over and to then give it to all the schools that you listed on the FAFSA and the state grant agency. So everybody, student and any parent contributors, have to provide consent. So I mentioned that the student and any parent contributors have to apply for a federal student aid ID or an FSA ID. So there's the website, the same website you go to complete the FAFSA, studentaid.gov. And you have to do this at least 4 days prior to completing the FAFSA because this FSA ID information has to be verified. For example, when you list your social security number, they'll verify you with the Social Security Administration to make sure everything matches up and you are who you say you are. And the things you have to have ready when you're applying for that FSA ID is a social security number if you have one. You will create a username and password, and that will be your FSA ID. You'll need your email address, mobile phone. You'll answer some security questions, and you'll enable the two-step verification process. So student definitely needs an FSA ID, but we get the question, do both spouses need an FSA ID or both parents? Only one parent needs an FSA ID if the parents are married and file joint tax return. So only one of them would need the FSA ID. If the student's independent and they're married, only the student would need the FSA ID if they file joint tax return with their parent, because you're using that FSA ID to pull that tax return over. So in these cases, you'd only need one. So how do you start the FAFSA? You go to studentaid.gov. You see where we have circled in red, start a new form. Okay. There's going to be different sections that you complete for the student. They'll answer those personal circumstance questions, which are the questions that determine if they're dependent on their parents. They'll input some demographic information. They'll input financial information. For example, if they have savings or investments in their own name. They'll list the colleges that they want the information to go to, and then there's a signature section. The parents will list some demographic information. Again, some parents will have to list that financial information, the assets, and they'll have to sign. Now, the student and parent, this is new this year too, log in separately with their FSA IDs to complete their respective sections. So what we have found is working the best is if the student starts the FAFSA, completes their section, signs it, logs out, because if they're both logged in at the same time, it sometimes causes problems. The parent then goes in and logs in, completes their section, and signs. So this is what it looks like when the student uses their username and password they set up under that FSA ID account. They'll enter their username and password. And then they check, I am a student, starting the FAFSA. There's a couple videos and things that will pop up. You're welcome to listen to them, or you can just hit continue and pass by. And there's some information about, what you're expected to see during the FAFSA process. So that's all of this, what to expect, what happens after you file the FAFSA. And then some of your basic demographic information that you entered when you set up your FSA ID will automatically show up. If any of this needs to be changed, you can't change it on the screen. You have to go back to the FSA ID and change it in their settings. Throughout the FAFSA, you'll see this circle with an I. So if you need more information on something you're having trouble with, you just click on that I and you'll be able to find some help with that question. One of the spots I always say people should click on the I is when they're asking for assets. I think it's a good idea because it will say, here's the assets we want you to include, and here's the assets we don't want you to include. So you make sure you're reporting the right thing. The student will then be asked, and you can see at the top, it's kind of small, but where you see FAFSA 2425, it says student, Raya Tran. So I'm in the student section. That's the only place you can really tell. So it asks the student the state of legal residence, so it'd be Pennsylvania. And when did the student become a legal resident? You would put the month and year there. So if you were born here, it would be the month and year of your birthday. This is where you're going to provide consent and approval so that the federal tax information can be pulled over. You have to scroll all the way down because people say, I didn't see that approved. And it's because you have to scroll all the way down to the top, to the bottom of the page. Then the student will answer those personal circumstance questions that we talked about. They will then answer their marital status. So most high school seniors are going to say single, never married, but there's a bunch of choices there they can choose from. So the student's then going to be asked, when the student begins the 24-25 year, what grade level will they be? So most students are going to be first year. They're just starting out. The next question they ask is, when you start in 24-25, will you have your bachelor's degree? And you won't because you're just starting college. There is a question, will the student be pursuing an initial teaching certificate at the elementary or secondary level? Probably not, because you haven't gotten to that point, but that's for some aid eligibility specific to somebody trying to get their teaching certificate. Here's the questions, those personal circumstance questions that we talked about. If they can't say yes to any of those questions, they just check the box that we have circled in red, none of these apply. And then they'll be considered dependent. They will be asked at any time on or after July 1st, 2023, was the student unaccompanied and either homeless or self-supporting and at the risk of being homeless? So if you can answer yes to that, you'll be considered independent, but probably be asked for some supporting documentation by the school. Otherwise, you would just say no. There's an additional question. This is new this year too, because sometimes students can't answer yes to any of those questions that would make them independent, but they have a really unusual circumstance where a school may consider them independent. So you can look through these reasons, but if you have an unusual circumstance, you can check yes here. You won't be asked for any parent information, but the school will then be asking for documentation to support that unusual circumstance. The student will then be asked for some information about their parents. They'll be asked, are the parents married to each other? They'll be asked, do the parents live together? Did one parent provide more financial support than the other parent? Because in this case, they're saying my parents aren't married to each other, they don't live together. So they're assuming they're divorced or separated. So they're saying who provided more than half support over the past 12 months. So at that point, the student can invite who their contributors are. Most times it's just one parent they have to invite. For example, if parents are married filing a joint tax return, they only have to invite one parent, and it should be the parent that applied for the FSA ID. If the parents say are married filing separate tax returns, they're going to have to invite both parents, and both parents will have to get an FSA ID. The parent will then get an email, which will have an invitation where they can accept or log in and get to their section of the FAFSA, or they can go out to studentaid.gov and log in with their FSA ID and just start the FAFSA from that site. Student is then asked for some demographic information about gender, race, ethnicity, citizenship status, their parents' education status. There is a question about if a parent was killed in the line of duty, and that again is for specific Pell eligibility. And they'll ask about the student's high school completion status. So here's where they'll ask about the gender and other questions. If you don't feel comfortable answering these questions, you can say prefer not to answer. These answers cannot be viewed by any of the contributors on your form, and they can't be viewed by the schools. So the student has to indicate if they're a citizen, an eligible non-citizen, or neither. They will have to answer if their parents attended college, never attended college, one or both parents completed college, and that these questions are just used for statistical purposes. Doesn't have anything to do with the student's eligibility for financial aid. The student will then be asked what their high school completion status will be at the beginning of 2024-25. So the student either says, I'll have my high school diploma, or I'll have my GED, or I might have participated in a homeschool program, or none of the above. At that point, they ask what high school did the student go to. So the student can put in the state and the city and search for the high school. This is where they ask if the student, if they're under 33 years old, was a parent or guardian killed in the line of duty. So, and they give you specifics about that. So, if a student meets this eligibility, that student is eligible for the maximum federal Pell Grant. So then we get to the finance section for the student, where they're going to answer a few income questions and some asset questions. So most of the tax information that is needed on the FAFSA is automatically pulled over, but there are a few questions that aren't. So they're going to say, did a student have rollover money in an IRA? Probably not, but those questions would be asked. They'll ask if the student paid taxes on any college grants or scholarships, and usually the answer to that is no. Or did the student have foreign earned income exclusion? Most times I'm helping a student, these are all zeros. They then have to list what they have as of the date they're sitting down completing the FAFSA in the their cash checking savings account. They're asked, do they have any kind of investments? So, they might have CDs or savings bonds or something from when they were young. They'd have to list the value of them. And then they'll ask if they have a business or a farm. The next section is going to ask the student, what colleges do you want this information sent to? So a student can list up to 20 colleges. So they go in and they can put the state and search by, all the schools in the state, or search by the name and start populating the colleges they want the information to go to. Again, they can list up to 20 schools. So this is kind of what it looks like when you're searching. And again, the student does not have to have applied yet to these schools. They don't have to have been admitted. You can add additional schools later, but this year, because right now, after you submit the FAFSA, you can't make any changes until the end of January when all that information goes to schools. If you submit the FAFSA tonight, tomorrow you want to add a school, you have to wait till the end of January. So then the students presented with this review page with the different sections, and you can expand those sections to see how you answered and make sure everything's okay. You can make edits here. Then it'll show the parents that were invited to include their information, the parent contributor section. The student then can go in and check that box saying I agree to the terms and hit submit. So the student section's complete, and this is what they receive. And then the parent starts their section. So the parent, as I said, can either log in from their email invite, or they can go right into studentaid.gov, put their FSA ID, username and password, and log in that way. So once the parent logs in, they can say, I'm accepting the invitation. And they'll get some general information about what happens when you file the FAFSA form. They'll get the same videos, which they can either watch or skip through. And then they'll start filling out their information on the FAFSA. So since this parent logged in with their FSA ID, just like the student, some of their information is pre-populated. They then have to provide consent and approval for the IRS to pull their information over from the taxes. They'll answer the same kinds of things, their marital status, their state of legal residence, and when they became a legal resident. They'll get to their finance section. Now, there's a question here that's going to be asked. If in 22 or 23, did the dependent student's parents or anybody else in their family receive means-tested benefits? And you can see the different kinds of means-tested benefits there are. It could be earned income tax credit. It could be free or reduced lunch, Medicaid. So there's a whole list of those questions there. If any of them apply to you and you've received them, you want to check that. Otherwise, you would say none of these apply. Now, the family size is brought right over from the tax return. It's everybody that was listed as an exemption on the tax return. So we have found, I don't know if it's a glitch, we're being told kind of, on a daily basis, if there's a glitch, if there's a resolution, but it looks like for some reason the family size isn't being pulled over correctly. So you can say, yes, the parent size or the family size is different so that you can actually see what's listed. And if it's incorrect, you can fix it. The parents will then be asked the question, how many people in the parent's family will be in college? Now, this information or this question remained on the FAFSA, but the formula that the FAFSA uses no longer takes into consideration if you have more than one in college at the same time. But the question remained on the FAFSA because the idea was maybe some schools that have their own institutional aid might want to take this into consideration. So then the parent will get to their tax return information. They'll be asked to answer a few questions that will not be pulled over from the tax return. So they're going to say, did the parent receive the earned income tax credit? Did the parent pay any taxes on grants, scholarships, things like that? Did the parents have foreign earned income exclusion? So if any of those apply, they would complete that or those sections. The parent will then be asked, did or will the parent file a 2022 joint tax return with their current spouse? And they say yes or no. So, a couple other, if the parent's required to list assets, they were to answer these questions. So if they're receiving any kind of child support, it would be the child support received for the most complete calendar year, the total amount. If they have anything in savings, checking, or cash, they would list that. It doesn't show you here the circle with the eye, but the current net worth of businesses and investment farms is asked for, so you can answer that question, but it will tell you if you have investments, here's what you include, here's what you don't include. So things like the value of your primary residence, the value of your qualified retirement accounts, value of insurance policies, the value of a 529 for a student or a child other than the student you're filling out the FAFSA for. The 529 is considered an investment under the parents, but you're only listing the amount you have for that student that you're completing the FAFSA for. So it gives you some good information if you hit that button. And here's what I just said, what's not considered an asset. The reason some people are exempt from reporting assets, the formula may have decided this person's going to be eligible for a maximum Pell Grant, so we're not going to ask them about their assets because it won't make a difference. Or somebody in the household received a federal means tested benefit program in one of the 2 prior calendar years. Or a dependent applicant whose parents have a total adjusted gross income of less than $60,000 and do not file one of these schedules. So they're kind of, the skip logic in the FAFSA is kind of looking at this information to determine, do we really need this person's assets? So if the parent listed that there's another parent in the picture, whether it be, it could be a step parent or, biological parent, they will list this general information about that parent. The parent will then be given their review page, same as the student, and they can look, expand each section if they want to take a look to see what they answered before they submit. They can edit responses. The parent will then sign their section of the FAFSA form, and they'll get what's called an abbreviated confirmation page saying, the student will eventually receive notification of processing. They'll receive information from their school, those kinds of things. The student will actually get a confirmation page, and it will show what their student aid index is. That's the result of the FAFSA, or it's called SAI for short. So you can see we have that circle in red. So this person has a 0 student aid index. So based on what they provided, they really can't contribute anything towards college. And the schools that they're applying to are going to take a look at that and see what they can offer. Also underneath, you'll see that if that person was eligible for a federal Pell Grant, it would give them an estimate. So now the FAFSA is pretty much complete. How do you apply for the Pennsylvania State Grant Form? In prior years, we had a link right off of the confirmation page of the FAFSA to go and apply for the Pennsylvania State Grant Form. That did not get done this year because they were making so many changes, it just didn't happen. So what we're going to do at FIA is we are going to, once we get the information from the feds, late January, early February, we're going to do some testing with our system. And then we're going to notify students that said they're a Pennsylvania resident by email to come out to our FIA website, and we'll tell them the specific link and complete the Pennsylvania State Grant Form. So there's a lot of federal student aid YouTube videos if you need help in understanding FAFSA. But like I showed you, there are some videos right within the FAFSA. Also on our FIA.org website, on our resource page, we have a lot of information about the FAFSA and the financial aid process in general. There is my contact information again. I thought I had that at the end. So if you think of anything later, because I know this is a lot of information to take in, feel free to send me an email. But at this point, that's kind of the end of my formal presentation, but I'll be glad to answer any questions. So I don't know, Liz, if you want to you know, if you want me to just go through the chat or.
There is a question. Do you see the question? It says, I made a mistake and listed the value on 529 as a student asset and parent asset. Is this something I'll be able to correct? Does the updated information get sent to schools or do I have to contact them each myself?
Okay, so once you're allowed to make corrections, which like I said, will probably, or from what they're telling us, be the end of January, you can go in and take it out of the student's asset because it should be, the 529 should be a parent asset. And all that corrected information will be sent to the schools and to FAFSA.
So if you joined us a little bit late, if you have a question, you can type it into the chat or to the question and answers. There's another question. Where do I find my FSA ID?
Okay, so when you went in to create your FSA ID, if you did create an FSA ID, you actually picked a username and password. That is your FSA ID. So I know a lot of people get confused saying, I never got my FSA ID emailed to me. And you never will, because your username and password that you selected or created, that's your FSA ID. Now, if you never created an FSA ID, you go out to that studentaid.gov website, and there is a link that says create account. You go in and do that. And like I said, the student has to have one, and depending on the parent status, it could be one or both parents.
We do have in the weekly email blast in the college news section, there is a link with the specific steps and the website link for setting up the FSA ID too. If you haven't done that yet, you could refer to last week's. It's in there. And it'll be in the next week's too. The next question is, my daughter is not able to create an ID. It keeps kicking her out. What should I do?
Okay, for some reason, I don't know why the FSA ID is doing all kinds of funky things this year. The only thing, I don't have access to that federal data. You'd have to call that number. When you're on the FAFSA page, there's a number, a 1-800 number that you can call the feds. And I know that a lot of people are being put on hold. A lot of people are getting cut off, but that's the only way you can get your problems creating an FSA ID. I mean, I don't know. I've seen where a student's using the incorrect social security number, so it's not letting it go through. I don't know if that's the issue. Sometimes students are leaving a space in front of the FSA or the social security number. So I'm not sure what the reason is. Are you getting an error? Because sometimes a student gets an error that somebody else is using the social security number. So that's really something you have to take up with the feds, calling that 1-800 number.
There was just another comment that someone else is experiencing that where they just can't get it to go through.
The two biggest problems I'm seeing this year are the FSA ID. I don't know why, because that really didn't change much. There was only one change to that. And providing signatures. For some reason, there's an issue with providing signatures. I don't know, you know, but this is all considered a soft launch. And as they find bugs, they're trying to come up with resolutions, but not everyone, you know, every problem has the resolution yet. Okay, somebody else has a question. Do not see the questions that ask me what my assets are. Okay, so this person joined late but isn't sure why they're not asking her for her assets. So what I mentioned was, based on the way you answer the questions on the FAFSA, there's skip logic built into the FAFSA, you may not have to provide assets. So I'm assuming that's what's happening. I don't know. So you can go ahead and submit the FAFSA because that's the way it's supposed to work. I wouldn't say you have to do a hard copy. You think the skip logic's wrong? That could very well be. Did this person see let me see. I'll pull up the page. Okay. The page. Okay. These are the reasons that the skip logic looks at somebody and says, you don't have to complete your assets. If you don't fit any of those categories, the only thing is you wouldn't know if you're qualifying for a maximum Pell Grant. There's no way for you to tell that. That's all based, and that's different this year. There used to be a nice chart where it said, if the student aid index used to be called the expected family contribution, and say that was 0, you could look in the chart and say, I'm eligible for the maximum Pell Grant. There's no more charts. They're looking at things like, is it a single parent? How much above the poverty level are they in their state? So there's kind of no way for you to know. So if you really don't think you meet any of this criteria, you'd have to call that Fed number. I did hear one of my colleagues said that she kind of felt like this might not be working properly. And we have that question out to the feds, but we haven't gotten an answer. So I'm sorry, that's all I can give you at this point, because we're not getting, we're trying to get answers as well. Okay, how are they verifying the contributor's assets like 529s? Okay, so the assets wouldn't be coming over from your tax returns. They're really not verifying them. The school might verify them. They may see something, well, for example, they might see something on the tax return where you have interest earned, yet you listed no assets, and they might say, what created the asset, and ask you for some documentation. But that's kind of the individual schools, or FIA might, ask a question about your assets. But the FAFSA itself doesn't go out and say, give me proof that you have this amount of money in a 529.
So we'll just give another minute if there's any other specific questions. If there's any specific questions just related general guidance stuff, or other senior stuff that's happening right now, feel free to put that in there too. I can try to answer any of that. You just want to also make sure if any of the schools that your students are applying to require the CSS profile. You want to make sure you don't miss that. That's another financial aid form that some colleges do require.
Yeah, I see the person that asked the question said, I've tried the Fed helpline, chat, and email, no response. They are, I know we got through the other night. It was a miracle with a student I was helping. So unfortunately, all I can tell you is you have to keep trying. They have been crazy busy because of the FAFSA opening. So hopefully that'll get a little better. But like I said, nobody's getting your information till the end of January. So you're not late. So you have a little time to wait. And you're really not late until after the schools that your student's applying to, they'll all have a deadline. They want you to file the FAFSA by. So that's really your deadline to get everything in.
There's a question, how long will it take to process the FAFSA?
Okay, so none of the FAFSAs, they're not getting to any schools till the end of January. So I guess that's the answer. It's not going to be, nothing's going to happen before that. Now, if you're asking how long is it going to take for the school to do something with it once they have it, that again, that's up to each individual school, because when they get the results of the FAFSA, all schools have their own financial aid management system that they're going to have to do some testing with and make sure everything's working properly. And then once they feel comfortable with that, they'll start sending out notifications to students about what they're eligible for. Some students will be selected for verification, which means the school may ask you to verify some of the information you put on the FAFSA, for example, household size. They're asking me how long it might take to process a hard copy version as opposed hard copy for paper FAFSA. They're not even going to look at them until February. So the online version is going to get processed before the hard copy.
Fran, do you know the 1-800 number for FAFSA?
Art, I don't want to give you the wrong number. I did here. It's 1-800. I can put it in the chat if you want.
I'm typing it in if you want to say it.
Okay. 1-800-433-3243.
Okay, 1-800-433-3243.
Yes.
All right, got it. All right, so that's in the chat. All right. So it looks like there aren't any more questions. I would just say, you know, as questions come up, we're getting questions too, and I know with you know, with everything being new and everything and information, you know, kind of being in a delay and being able to get you know, support or someone to answer the phone can be super frustrating. So I would just say, like, be patient and keep in touch. If for some reason it gets to be, you know, towards the end of January and you're not still able to get through and things like that, and there's some sort of early financial aid deadline coming up for you, I think that it would be a good idea probably to reach out to colleges. But hopefully you'll be able to get somebody on the phone. Colleges are going to know that this is happening. They're waiting for this information as well, so they know that there's some glitches and some resolutions that are happening right now as since they just rolled this out. So I believe that they will definitely work with students and be you know, accommodating with that. But I think it's just keeping that line of communication open if you're really not able to get through to taking some next steps. And you can certainly reach out to us and we can try to get you in touch with someone and at the schools. But I think that's probably the best way to go, is just to like keep a line of communication open with the financial aid offices at the colleges and see, you know, what they're recommending if you're having trouble. But I'm hopeful that everybody will be able to get somebody at some point on the phone and get the issues resolved. It just might take a little bit of time. Any closing remarks, Fran?
I believe just what you said, it is really frustrating, and I feel bad because I don't have an answer for some things because they don't even know, because there's so many things going wrong. But hopefully that'll get, you know, rectified. And I know, you know, I know schools are being flexible because they realize, you know, it's not the students' fault. It's, you know, just the way things are this year. So as Liz said, be patient. And I know that's hard to do because I know if I was filling out the FAFSA, I'd want to make sure everything was right and it's all done. But, you know, and the FSA ID, very frustrating, and you can't get somebody on the phone. So hopefully that'll get better too, but hang in there.
Yep. And as always, we do have we've recorded this, so we will actually put this link online once that's kind of finalized on the guidance page under the financial aid section. We'll put a link to this. But we do have Fran's contact information, and sometimes we do reach out to her with questions. And you know, she's been a great resource to us. If you have questions, you know, we can put you in touch with her in the future as well.
Definitely.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us, and we hope that you found this helpful. Have a great night.
Thanks, Liz.
Bye. Thanks, Fran.